If you lived in Renaissance Europe, would you dare entrust your very life to strangers? Men who fought not for honor or loyalty, but simply for money. Just imagine, instead of a loyal army nurtured by a monarch, the soldiers around you are from all over. Switzerland, Italy, Germany, forming a formidable force, yet ready to abandon the front lines if the enemy offers a higher price. The Renaissance was not only an era of great art knowledge and invention, but also a period when warfare became a service. Nobles, popes, and even powerful city-states bought and sold blood and bone as if they were hiring a team of construction workers. And these men, called mercenaries, Condottieri, became a haunting symbol reflecting the extreme cruelty and pragmatism of this era. In the brilliant glow of paintings by Leonardo da Vinci or the works of Michelangelo, a shadow loomed armies trampling across the plains of Italy, burning villages and leaving behind nameless corpses. But why did warfare, traditionally a matter of life and death between nations, transform into such an organized business? And how did these mercenaries truly change the face of Europe? Today, let's explore the story of mercenaries in the Renaissance, when blood and bone were bought and sold like commodities. Europe in the 15th and 16th centuries was a picture of contradictions. While Italian city-states like Florence, Venice, and Milan were becoming centers of art and commerce, incessant warfare was also breaking out. Nations and lords alike were eager to expand their territories, protect commercial interests, and demonstrate their power. However, the biggest problem was that no one wanted to maintain a standing army. A loyal army meant the national treasury had to pay to support them year-round, even when there was no war. For city-states that relied heavily on trade and banking, this was an unacceptable burden. A pragmatic solution was born: hire mercenaries to fight for a short period, then disband them when the battle was over. In Italy, this practice developed so strongly that it was called condotta, meaning a contract for hiring soldiers. A lord could spend a large sum of money to hire an entire army commanded by a condottiere mercenary leader. These armies included not only Italians, but also famed Swiss soldiers with their long pikes and the notoriously brutal German Landsknecht. They were well-paid, lived in their own barracks, and wore distinctive uniforms. Many condottieri even became as wealthy and powerful as nobles. Some who were once poor peasants rose to become counts and dukes through the mercenary profession. However, the downside was incredibly harsh. Mercenaries were often not loyal to any nation. They could switch sides right on the battlefield if the opponent offered more gold. And when the war ended, they wandered across Europe, turning into marauding gangs that spread terror among civilians. It was in this chaotic context that mercenaries became the force that decided the fate of many dynasties, while also leaving a painful scar on the historical memory of Renaissance Europe. The rise of the condottieri, the mercenary leaders, was one of the most unique phenomena of Renaissance Europe. They were not just generals, but war entrepreneurs, men who signed contracts of blood with city-states, princes, and even the Pope. From the late 14th century, as Italian city-states grew wealthy from trade and banking, the need to protect their interests and expand their territories grew ever larger. But instead of maintaining long-term armies, Florence, Venice, and Milan chose to outsource warfare. And that is precisely when the condottieri appeared. The condottieri signed a condotta, a contract specifying the number of soldiers, the length of service payment, and even clauses for betrayal should it occur. Many contracts even stipulated that if a battle was unnecessary, they would avoid direct confrontation to limit casualties, because losing men meant losing profit. The most prominent among them was Francesco Sforza. Born the son of a poor condottiere, he used his military talent and cunning to gradually climb to the pinnacle of power. After serving many different masters, Sforza won the trust of Duchess Bianca. Maria Visconti married her and then became the Duke of Milan, rising from an unknown mercenary to one of the most powerful lords in Italy. Another example is John Hawkwood, an English knight who, after fighting in the Hundred Years' War, came to Italy and formed a mercenary army called the White Company. He was employed by many city-states, and despite being notoriously brutal, Hawkwood was honored by the city of Florence with a portrait in its great cathedral, a testament to the mix of admiration and fear felt towards mercenaries. The condottieri were known more for their tactical skill than for their courageous spirit. They often prolonged wars to earn more money or made secret agreements with the enemy to avoid losses. This led Machiavelli, author of The Prince, to vehemently criticize mercenaries, calling them cowardly and treacherous, and arguing that a nation relying on them would soon be destroyed. However, when they did act, they could unleash terror. The Swiss with their long pikes could often tear through enemy ranks in an instant. The German Landsknecht were famous for their brutality, often massacring civilians after each campaign. Their rampages in Italy left painful memories for many generations. The 15th century witnessed the golden age of the Condottieri. They were wealthy, respected, and at times even dominated the politics of the Italian city-states. But by the 16th century, as major powers like France and Spain began to intervene in Italy with large standing armies, the role of mercenaries gradually weakened. The peak of this decline was the Sacco di Roma in 1527, when German and Spanish mercenaries mutinied, sacked Rome, and massacred tens of thousands of people. The holy city of Christianity turned into a sea of blood, sending shudders throughout Europe. This is also seen as the death knell for the era of the Condottieri, as dynasties were forced to build standing armies for better control. Though cursed as traitors and profiteers, the mercenaries of the Renaissance completely changed how Europe viewed warfare. They turned conflict into a service that could be bought and sold, laying the foundation for the commercialization of violence that the modern world still faces. And perhaps the harshest lesson they left behind is this: when human blood becomes a commodity, the line between civilization and barbarism is but a fragile thread. The emergence of mercenaries during the Renaissance was not just a military phenomenon. It was also a reflection of the cruelty of a time when human life was measured and bargained for like a piece of merchandise. First and foremost, war was no longer about defending one's homeland or national honor. It became a business transaction where contracts of blood were signed coldly, and each life was valued only by the amount of gold its master was willing to pay. For peasants, artisans, or innocent civilians, death could come at any moment, not because they were the enemy, but simply because they lived in a land where a mercenary army needed to cover its costs. Villages were burned, fields were plundered, and women and children were left amidst the ashes, all to enrich a few condottieri. Secondly, mercenaries upended the concepts of loyalty and honor. A king or a city-state could spend a fortune to hire an army, but if the enemy offered a higher price, that same army was ready to switch sides in the middle of a battle. The consequence was that war became a bitter farce. Battles were prolonged not for strategic reasons, but for calculations of profit. The thinker Machiavelli wrote in Indignation, "Whoever places their trust in mercenaries is placing their trust in traitors." The pinnacle of this cruelty was the Sacco di Roma in 1527. When the Landsknecht and Spanish soldiers mutinied, they turned Rome, the heart of Christianity, into a living hell. Tens of thousands were killed, monasteries were destroyed, and churches were looted. The cries of anguish mixed with the stench of blood filled the capital, sending a shiver down Europe's spine. Rome, the city that was once an eternal symbol of civilization, was torn apart by mercenaries in just a few days. From then on, a great debate spread across the continent: can war become a service? Many lords still cited the convenience and economic benefits of hiring troops instead of maintaining a standing army. But conversely, a growing number of voices criticized the inhumanity, viewing mercenaries as a stain on the Renaissance. An era praised for its art and knowledge, yet overshadowed by massacres. And on a deeper level, mercenaries left a bitter lesson: when people see each other only through the value of money, war will no longer have a just cause, only endless destruction. The ruins of villages, the orphaned children, the ravaged cities are living proof of the price humanity pays when it turns blood and bone into a business. Today, when we look back at the Renaissance, we often remember Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, magnificent castles or great inventions. But alongside that light, there remains a shadow. We cannot forget mercenaries, a symbol of a time when war was commercialized to its very core. If in the past the condottieri signed contracts of blood with swords and pikes, today the form of war as a service still exists in many different guises. Private military companies and contract soldiers hired for conflict zones continue a controversial legacy of the Renaissance mercenaries. Although the context has changed, the question remains just as relevant: can a war be righteous when those holding the guns are fighting only for money? And that is a reminder for us all. Civilization is not measured only by magnificent paintings or cathedrals, but also by how people treat the lives of their fellow human beings. When blood and bone are haggled over, all that remains is ash. So what do you think? If you lived during the Renaissance, would you dare to trust those mercenary armies? Or would you shudder at the thought that the fate of an entire kingdom could be decided by a single bag of gold? Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to explore more historical mysteries with us.